We call it the switcheroo, where someone has a principal place of residence, they want to turn it into an investment property, or they've got an investment property, they want to turn it into a principal place of residence. There's a number of things that are important here, but how often do you come across, people wanting to do the switcheroo?
Yeah, no, people do that all the time. In fact, I reckon a lot of property investors only acquire properties because they've moved for their job and they haven't sold the old one, that sort of switcheroo comes around quite a bit. So it's a matter of being very careful with the loans, because if you borrow to buy a new property to live in, then you're not going to get a tax deduction for that borrowing. And if you've almost paid off your other home, there's not much of interest you're going to claim against the rent. So for the average person that's almost paid down their original home, it becomes not worth keeping. You really can't afford to service a huge loan on the next property, whether it be in a new location or they've just gone to a better house. Because by the time they've saved up enough equity to get that better house, it's a hell of a debt for the better house with very little debt and all this rental income. Also, what happens is they might have used the theory of put your wages in the loan and then draw down to pay a credit card or whatever, cover your living expenses. Well, that churns a loan. So every time you draw down, if it's not in an offset account, but it's in a redraw facility or it's a line of credit, every time you draw down, you're borrowing for private purposes. Over about 5 years, that loan becomes basically all borrowing for your food, your bank card bill, that sort of stuff, not for the original property you bought in the first place.
It's called polluting the loan, isn't it? And it's a very innocent mistake that people can make just from what you just described. You've turned the purpose of the loan from purchasing it to buy the house to purchasing it for the can of baked beans and the tomato sauce. So really, really important that you don't get this wrong. Now, anyone who's been listening to our podcast for any length of time, we've been talking about this for a long time. The difference between an offset and a redraw account is enormous, because you do not pay the loan off under an offset account, whereas the redraw, you're doing what you've just described, where you are changing the nature of the loan, fluctuating daily, weekly, monthly, depending on what you do. So if you do adopt the offset strategy that I do, that Ben does, that we're teaching our community to do, it does give you that enormous flexibility. It's like having buckets of money sitting against your home, where you're filling up these buckets to ultimately equal out the amount of debt that you have, but the debt still remains unchanged. Because if you have adopted that textbook then you can go and buy another principal place of residence and move the offset money against that principal place of residence, and without any cash flow disadvantage to you, because you haven't changed the nature of the loan. It's still for the property. The purpose is now changed, so the interest on the loan now becomes deductible if you've done that right, Julia.